right. Well, welcome to Roots of Reality Experiences. Today I'm joined by Dr. Wendy K. Tam Cho, who is a professor in the departments of political science, mathematics, statistics, computer science, Asian American studies, and the College of Law at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She's also a senior research scientist at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And lastly, she is also a fellow of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation and the Society for Political Methodology. So, Dr. Cho, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
So, first off, I just want to get started talking about your work with gerrymandering. How did you first get interested in the subject?
It's a little bit hard to remember now because it's a pretty long-standing interest.
Okay.
I wrote my first paper on it actually as an undergraduate in college, and that's more than 30 years ago now. So,
okay, it's a long history then. And when did you start thinking about it in an academic sense and like wanting to work on it as part of your research for your career?
I guess that stems from the same history. I mean, I wrote about it for my undergraduate honors thesis when I was an undergraduate. And that project involved computing also, but this was in the late 80s. And in the late 80s, computing just wasn't what it is today.
Right.
And so actually, I've had this idea for a long time. And I would revisit it every, I don't know, let's say a decade. And every decade I could make a little bit more progress on it because computing was getting better. And that's just, this last decade, I got to working on the supercomputers. And then, things started really falling into place as far as the computing and the theory behind the models.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. So, I mean, it sounds like then gerrymandering has been something that's been on your mind for a long time. And was it your undergraduate work when you first realized that like sort of gerrymandering is this problem in society that kind of needs to be addressed somehow and you started to get interested in it that way, or?
Yeah, I've always been interested in redistricting. I think it's just it used to be really obscure. And now I guess it's a lot more popular. But it used to be really obscure. And I just thought it was a really interesting idea because it involved this like covert power play by the politicians that nobody knew about.
Right, sure. Yeah, no, that's it's definitely true. And you're right that a lot of people seem to be a bit more aware now today, I think, than before in terms of being concerned about gerrymandering. I think that's also probably due to the heightened tension towards political polarization and people being more aware of the two-party system and sort of that battle going back and forth.
Gerrymanders, people who draw the maps, have gotten better at producing the outcomes they want.
Yeah, that's something I was definitely interested in talking about here in a second too, because that's another big part of it is just how much gerrymandering has changed over time. I guess first off, since a lot of your work deals with supercomputing, what exactly is a supercomputer for those that might not be aware?
It's a broad class of computing, but it's basically high performance computing where you can do a lot more computing than you can, let's say, on a laptop. And so the types of machines that I use are massively parallel. And there are other types of computing, like quantum computing, which is a completely different thing. So it requires different kind of knowledge, different types of skills to learn how to code on different types of computing architecture. But I just have done all my work on massively parallel architecture.
Okay, interesting. All right. So basically, it's like just a normal computer on steroids, I guess. It does a lot more powerful, I guess. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so it has a lot more processors and they can work in parallel or, at the same time on a problem. So sometimes I, explain it with like an analogy of building a house. If one person's building a house, one person builds the whole house. If you can get 10 people to build a house, then it could go a lot faster. if the 10 people can figure out how to coordinate among themselves and have, communicate with each other.
Ah, okay.
And if you have like 100,000 people, it can go really fast. It actually can go
Yeah.
really slow at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
It just depends on how you coordinate the workers actually, or the processors.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So how has technology changed the ability to gerrymander?
So there are a couple different things here. I guess one of the things I say all the time is technology is neither good nor bad. It's how the humans decide to use it.
Right.
And so the last 30 years have seen, this huge proliferation in computing technology. And a lot of that can be used for bad in the sense that, we have a lot more data and we can tell, where people live, how they voted in the past. We can track movement, all sorts of things like that that help you better predict how a certain area may vote.
Mhm.
And so if you do that and then you want to use that information for bad, you can obviously use it for bad. Um, but if you want to use it for good, you can use it for good, right? It's really a matter of how the humans decide to use that information.
Sure. Yeah, that makes perfect sense because I guess basically all of human history has been about this increasing technology that we have. Then, of course, that can be used in for good or bad things. If you think about like the development of various technologies that are used for the military or can be used for something else. Um, so it's interesting when it comes to your work because you're also talking about using technology in a way, I guess, of sort of combating gerrymandering. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the idea, to understand the process and understand what humans can do and what humans have done.
And so, what's the best way of combating gerrymandering with this sort of supercomputing and stuff? How do you go about that in the with like real world applications?
I think the answer to that has yet to be seen.
Okay.
It's another one of these, we have to see where the humans are going to go with the new technology. So the Supreme Court has ruled that redistricting is non-justiciable, which
Right.
basically means the Supreme Court isn't going to hear these you know cases any longer, these partisan gerrymandering cases. Um, so that, I guess, kind of throws a wrench into what were some of the plans of people for helping to combat gerrymandering, though it still can be heard by state courts. And so some of the things that we saw happening through the federal system can still happen through the state system. Whether it will or not, I'm not sure. That depends more on the court than on me.
Right.
But another idea that I've talked about a little bit is this idea that now that there's more awareness around redistricting and around this idea that you can understand the political landscape a little better, and you can know, like, on let's say on average how many seats would go Republican or Democrat, given a
Sure.
certain state and a certain set of rules. It's harder for the legislators to come back and say, well, this was the fairest outcome possible.
Right.
Something that's lopsided, and then before, no one could figure out if it was or if it wasn't, right? But they didn't have the data, they didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the ability to really assess that, even though they thought this can't possibly be true.
Sure. Yeah.
So some of it is just this idea that if the politicians think that it can't be checked, maybe they will change their behavior.
Okay. All
Maybe
right.
they will, maybe they won't, but
Right.
you know
Just depends, I guess, on how politically safe their district is or something. I don't know. Or the state. I know that one of the issues with state government is this the super majorities, and then whether the population cares enough to sort of combat that and make a big deal out of it. I guess that's the other thing is just whether people use this ability to shed light on gerrymandering and try to understand it.
Or use it to draw worse gerrymanders.
Yes, yeah, that's the alternative. Yeah, it always could be worse. That's definitely kind of a scary thing when you think about just how much a political system, especially one that's, democracy, can be manipulated in such vast ways. And so essentially what you're trying to do is develop technology that can help shed light on the gerrymandering and be able to call it out when it occurs. Have you been able to do that at all? And whether not necessarily in the courts, I suppose, but if so in the courts, that would be interesting too. But just in like in the public and the media, like have people researching this type of stuff been able to identify, okay, this is a horribly gerrymandered map. Everyone should be paying attention to this.
Yeah, we've done some of that in court. But I guess touching back on what you just said, I think the real key is how humans are going to redefine the processes by which they govern themselves, given the technology. I think that's actually the key to how things will change.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. It's a lot of it depends on what people want to do. And how confident are you that society actually cares enough to try to stop this reoccurring process that seems to be also plaguing both political parties, where everyone wants to use gerrymandering when they can, if they can get away with it, and people don't care enough to say something.
Yeah, I say this a lot, that we're not really having a technological problem. We're having more of a human problem.
Yeah.
And the technology, I think, has to be conceived of in such a way to help transform the processes by which we govern ourselves, to help humans be better humans, and not to help humans be worse humans. So that's actually a really hard problem.
Yeah, that definitely that's a whole nother factor to it that is kind of out of control when it comes to, you can't stop that with technology. You can only shed light on a problem and people either pay attention or not, I guess. What would you say have been some of the real world consequences of technology and people using technology to gerrymander? Like, are there particular maps or something or that throughout the country that were horribly gerrymandered, that you can point to, or any other examples perhaps?
Well, there were a number of lawsuits just closing out this last decade that were partisan gerrymanders, or one of the things that those of us who do redistricting say is, they're besides, death and taxes, the other sure thing is the lawsuits following redistricting.
Right.
There's always lawsuits. And I think there will be again this next decade coming up after the maps get drawn.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess that's probably true, since it's time to do that again, and we'll see how the public responds to that process. When you're conducting your research, how well known would you say it is for the public when it comes to the type of stuff that you're doing? Do you think many people are aware that there are people like you out there that are using technology to help show all these gerrymandered districts and make people aware of them, or is it hard to get the message out?
I think that's your job, actually.
Okay. Fair enough.
Not my job.
Yeah. Okay. So you create the resources, that's up to people like me and who are interested to help spread the word, I guess. So that's a fair point. And so I guess it must be interesting then to be in your position, because I guess this is a similar thing when it comes to, people dealing with technology or science in general, or any of the STEM fields, where researchers are kind of, working on a task, and then they kind of just let it go to the public and see what the public does with it. Have you been disappointed with how some people have responded, or the sort of the lack of response, perhaps, to some of your research or the research of colleagues when it comes to understanding gerrymandering and the technological aspects of it, or?
I think people more or less understand what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the place that I've been most disappointed is that, I'm a scientist and I do science. I work on, this problem, trying to understand it, trying to figure out how to solve it. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And sometimes we try to explain the more technical details to people. And that's also kind of fun and interesting to figure out how to do that. But science itself is a slow process, and I think it can solve problems. But it seems like once it gets out of this, purely scientific realm,
Yeah.
it's easily politicized.
Right.
Because I think the technical difficulties are pretty intricate, but the outcomes are overtly political. So if you use science and you don't come out with the right outcome, sometimes people say that you're not doing science.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of based on an outcome as opposed to what it is we're trying to do and to accomplish. So that's pretty disappointing, I think.
Yeah. I imagine. Yeah.
I don't know how you fix that. I don't think that you can justify scientific claims by outcomes. But that's how I think people see a lot of these things that are a little bit more technical than not.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely one of the huge concerns for modern society in the U.S., but also as globally as well. This type of issues are occurring with polarization and basically everything's about what can you gain politically from the results of something, rather than okay, what does this mean, and outside of the political perspective on these different subjects. How much attention do politicians pay to your work? Have you gotten any feedback from politicians like, hey, this is great, we need more of an independent redistricting, and this is a good way of fact checking potentially gerrymandered districts? Or have politicians just kind of shied away from it?
I think politicians are pretty cautious about it,
Okay.
because it's their job, and
Mhm.
you're somehow redefining their job, but they don't know exactly how you're doing that right now. And they're a little bit like the lawyers. They have a goal, and this is their job, right? They're politicians. They're advocates. They're, if I put somebody in office with a certain, for a certain ideology, I want them to support that, right? That's their job. It's not my
Right.
job.
Yeah.
I have a different job. But that's their job, and they're always kind of trying to figure out how to do their job.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I with my work, I do a lot of oral history work with former politicians, and so it's always interesting to ask them about like gerrymandering and what their experiences were with it, and how they look upon it. And typically, it's you usually see it fall across partisan lines, where if someone's benefiting from being from gerrymandered districts, they usually will care less than those that don't benefit. And so it does kind of fall across political lines. Occasionally, do you get someone that was sort of more in between and didn't really feel necessarily too loyal to the sort of the diehards on one particular party and feel it's bad. But it's unfortunate that you can obviously just see in modern American politics that not enough politicians really care about gerrymandering, because as you said, it does affect their jobs and their position of power. So that's, I guess, the main message is to get people active and acknowledging this problem, and then pressuring politicians to fix it. What would you?
Just change the process by which this occurs.
Yes, right. Yeah, yeah. If you had an idea of how to fix gerrymandering, because obviously you're talking about raising awareness for it, but do you think there's a particular way that you can use technology to fix redistricting so it's very fair, across partisan lines?
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I think people don't understand is how complex redistricting is and how
Right.
complex the socio-political issues are. And that for those complex socio-political issues, the role of science and technology is completely non-obvious.
Yeah.
The fact that we can compute more doesn't solve what amounts to fair representation.
Sure.
I think people think a lot about Democrats and Republicans, like there should be this many Democrats, this many
Right.
Republicans.
Yeah.
But as a people, as a society, we're a lot richer than that, right?
Yeah.
We're not just Democrats and Republicans. There's men and women, right? There's
Yeah.
sexual orientation, there's race, there's religion, a lot of things that people really identify with. That's not just Republican and Democrat. And then there's this idea of, if you're a minority, how much representation should a minority have? Should it be proportional or should it not be proportional? Should it be, should it be this rule? Should it be that rule? And these questions are really, complex. And I think
Yeah.
people really make it, really simplify that down to, this many Republicans, that many Democrats, and we're done, we're fair, we're good. And I don't think it's that simple.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I guess you really can't quantify all those different factors. And then if you're taking into account all those factors and trying to make it equally distributed in terms of potential representation, I'm not even sure how you could get enough data on people to even determine that in the first place, because that would be, I mean, if you look at all the different factors that shape a human being and who they are and what they think, I don't know if there's enough information even out there to create maps that are based on all those factors that make an individual person, and then being able to quantify all those people inside of a district, which you have to draw in the first place based on those factors. So,
but even if we could quantify, there's this underlying philosophical debate about what would be fair versus not fair. It's a little bit like the famous trolley problem, where you have this trolley and there's 5 people on a certain set of tracks, and you can change it so that there's the train moves and it just kills 1 person instead of 5. And at first it seems like, oh, then just kill 1 person instead of 5. And then, the story gets richer, right? So maybe the 5 people are children and the 1 person is old, or maybe the 5 people, have some illness and they're going to die soon anyway. And, there are all these kind of questions. And it's the same with redistricting. It's, what happens if this minority group has never been represented? What happens if, women in this particular state, have never had a female, member of Congress? What happens if, sexual orientation, which has never been an issue here, now has this huge community in this state? Do we have to take that into account? Should we take it into account? If we can, what if we can't? There are a lot of issues here that I think are very, very rich, and it's about how rich and diverse society is, and it's really not about computation, right? I can compute, like I know there's 5 people on this set of tracks and 1 person on that set of tracks, and that's just not the end of the issue there.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, I mean, another aspect to it would be that even if you're trying to take into account all of those factors when drawing a district, at what point do you move away from sort of the democratic vote when it comes to shaping a district as well? Because if a population of a district is mostly for one particular, I guess, type of person in society, whether religion and sort of political ideology, et cetera, then you're never going to have full representation, because there'll always be people within that district that will not identify ever. And so you're kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, not everyone's going to be represented the way they want, because they're going to live in a district that, maybe they don't like the Congress person that's representing them. And so you're only trying to do as best you can. You can't get perfect representation for anything, I suppose, unless you just add more and more. You basically just have an infinite number of legislators or something, which probably wouldn't make any sense, because you can't have one legislator representing, 500 people in a district when the rest of the 30,000 wants one other. So at the end of the day, I guess,
Very complex issue.
Yeah, it's just not fair in general. It's more of just about, balancing
A lot of competing interests.
Right. Balancing all those competing interests where you want it to be democratic, but at the same time, you don't want people getting, basically taken advantage of because of manipulations that are so grotesque that, any sane person would realize that this isn't fair. So in general,
not always balancing in one way.
Right. Yeah.
So that although it can be fair, a bunch of humans sitting in a room would decide that's not that fair, or it's not how we want to be fair, or it's not making society better if we do this. Even though it's quote unquote fair, or
right.
it's
subjective.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's democracy in general, is that societies are always going to be imperfect. Throughout the history of civilization, there's been no society that was without flaw, obviously, and that it's a messy process. I know a lot of foreign politicians just will talk about sort of for example, like passing legislation, when it comes to like making compromises as kind of like a process of making sausage or something, which I guess in many ways redistricting is kind of the same thing. It's a messy thing, but it can be better. And it's just a matter of figuring out what's the best way of doing it that we can all compromise on.
Exactly. And I think that's what computing does, is now we can compute more things. We can figure out what the trade-offs are in a more transparent way. We can say, all right, you can have another minority district, but then you're going to trade off, splitting up this city, or you're going to trade off something else, right? You can understand the trade-offs a little bit better. They can be more transparent. But at the end of the day, it's humans that make those final decisions, right? Sure. And it should be humans.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, just have to hope that people are interested in making compromises that everyone can live with, even if they're not, thrilled by it. But I guess that's just government and society in general. We all agree to be a part of this. So if we can come together and have some type of common ground, that would be a good start.
Right. And I think the role of computing then is to highlight, then, just bring more information to the debate, right? Yeah. If I want this, do I have to trade off something? If I want that, how much do I have to trade off? Is it possible to have, more minority representation and maintain certain types of partisan representation, or, other types of representation? There's lots of types of representation that, need to be considered in this idea of fairness.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's see, as technology is developing when it comes to supercomputing, are there concerns in your field about how supercomputing can continuously improve the process of gerrymandering to make it even easier to continue to manipulate things in sort of these ridiculous ways?
Yeah, that's definitely a danger. That's the human problem. That we produce technology and humans make society worse with it instead of making society better. So this is a great challenge, I think, for human society right now, is that we have all this technology and we need to use it to make ourselves better. And people aren't talking about that as much as they should be. They're talking a lot about having more technology and not talking enough about how to use that technology, or how to regulate that technology, or how to improve the processes by which we govern ourselves or interact, or any of these things that, would come with increasing technology.
Yeah, so there's clearly an ethics problem there when it comes to society and technology.
And not enough discussion about it.
Yeah. have you been concerned about someone trying to use the technology that you work on to gerrymander?
Yeah, for sure. So, people have said, something like this should be open source. And it's like, open source sounds good,
Hmm.
but it's the same issue. So if you open source it, who is going to go use it? It's
Right.
going to be the people who want to do bad things with it, more than I think the people who want to do good things with it.
Yeah. 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 That's, I guess, just an ongoing issue. Is just trying to, how do you have that balance? Wow. Yeah. So I guess now I'm just interested in what are you currently working on? Are you still working on projects with gerrymandering or other sort of political questions, or is there other work that you're involved with?
Uh, on work, I'm actually working on some COVID stuff. So,
Oh, okay, that's interesting. All right.
yeah,
Well,
also with the supercomputer.
yeah.
Um, I have access to the electronic health records of a large health system in the country.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay, that's cool. Well, in terms of your work, how can people keep up to date on sort of your research and what you're doing?
well, on my website, I always put my papers, so they can certainly do that. Um, the papers, I think, are maybe not so much for just whoever to read. I mean, you
Right.
can
A
read them
little,
if you want.
yeah, harder to consume probably for the average person.
Yeah, but I really think there's a huge role for people like you to take the work and spend time with it, or spend time with the science or the
Hmm.
scientists, to try to understand it and to try to bring it to the public. I think that's a really important role.
Yeah.
Um, and to at least at that level, then somehow to not politicize it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think that, yeah, that's one of the reasons why I try to, bring as many interesting people on as possible that can talk about all these subjects that, typically have been just very controversial in society, and try to find a way that can, help people become more aware of it, and then become more aware of it in this non-political way. So they're not sort of feeling like, everything has to be falling on somewhere along the political spectrum, but rather can just be information to use and understand to help make things better. So,
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty hard job. I think
yeah,
with,
yeah,
we saw it a lot with COVID, um, that, we're trying to solve this health crisis here and people are just playing politics. It's like, okay, I didn't get the scientist to say what I want, but I can find another scientist. You can actually always find another scientist.
yes, yes. That's one of the funny things. That's right. Yeah, yeah,
uh, but it's also true in redistricting. It's exactly what's happening, but people aren't seeing it because everybody thinks we're obviously gerrymandering. And so any scientist who says we're gerrymandering must be doing science. It's not true.
right.
Um,
Yeah, just because someone claims to be an expert doesn't mean their research is supported by the consensus of experts, I suppose.
yeah,
Yeah, that's always a challenge because people will always look for those individuals that will sort of confirm their bias, and then they'll just latch on to them like, oh, well, this person's a doctor, or this person is this, so they must be right.
yeah.
Um,
So in this sense, you're much more important than I am.
well, I don't know if I'd say that, but yeah, I definitely feel like there's a role I can do to help contribute. So I just really appreciate that there's people like you that are trying to do all these things to improve society, even if people, um, you know, aren't willing to utilize it and use it for good and try to make things better. Because obviously, if there weren't people like you doing this research, then we would have no research, and things would probably be even worse. So possibly. So
Yeah, well, I don't know. I actually think that if you misuse science, it's worse than not having science at all. Because
mm,
before we just knew it was political,
yeah,
and that was fine. We're just like, okay, we know it's political. But
yeah.
if you try to justify something under the guise of science, that's worse than no science at all.
Yeah, I guess in the field of gerrymandering, yeah, because it's you can definitely just use it to help promote some ideology, basically, that can make things even worse. So that's not good.
Yeah, and you pretend that you have scientific backing.
Yeah. Even if someone does actually have scientific backing, it's better to hear scientists come out from a nonpartisan perspective and saying that versus, a politician saying it, because then everyone, even if they're right and, they are talking about something important, they can still be perceived as just being biased because they are a politician in the first place.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry I leave you on such a downer there.
No, that's okay. That's par for the course. So my goal is to sort of just give people a little bit of what's actually happening, and I don't think that it has to be such a downer, because it's better to know a problem exists than to pay no attention to it and let it get worse and worse and worse. So hopefully now people can be motivated to take action and try to make something with it. So
Yeah, hopefully.
well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been really interesting and a subject that definitely I think more people should know about.
Well, thanks for